It's Molly Riversea and welcome back to my channel. Today we are on a quest to find my perfect eventing partner. Our story begins when I received the weekly newspaper where I spotted out 5 promising prospects on the sales page to trial ride and see if one of these beauties could possibly be a new addition to our barn family. Since I sold one of my main competing horses, Autumn, I have more time and I would love to have another horse to event with for this coming season. I have lots of events I plan to go to this summer and I don't want to fry Buggy's brain, so I've been saving a lot of money and finally have enough to buy my dream horse, one that has all the buttons and is ready to go out competing. We have got quite the day ahead as we are about to trial ride 5 different horses at 5 different barns. So let's hit the road. And the first listing on the Jorvik Gazette sales page had us going to the quaint Moorland stables, which is actually where I bought Buggy, so it was kind of odd coming back here for another horse trying. Moorland led us to our first trial ride, Phoenix, a dun Belgian warm-blood gelding. This gelding was a project taken in by the barn owner, so he hasn't had any professional training, but he had been shown in some beginner novice events around the island. He also had some lovely conformation, definitely an uphill type, which I liked, and since I bought Buggy from the same place and of course absolutely love him, I was pretty excited to be trying out Phoenix. Right as I got on, he immediately pulled the reins out of my hands, which could be a nerves thing as he might not be used to having new riders on him, but it is an annoying habit. I didn't want to come to any assumptions too quickly, so we continued on. I noticed he was very fidgety and anxious. When I was cantering him around, he had already begun to sweat, and this horse is in shape, so it's not likely that it was because he was working hard, more so that he was working himself up. He definitely was a bit of a hothead, and if I'm going to seriously compete and event with this horse, it would make going out a lot harder because hauling out with an easily overwhelmed and anxious horse can be a bit of a nightmare. On to the positives, he was very eager to please. I actually had the opportunity to pop him over some fences, and let me tell you, this horse was super scopy. He could totally make it to the preliminary level someday with some work. He was getting a bit strong at some points and kind of taking over. As we kept working together, I noticed that as I got his focus, he was really tuning into my cues. So even though the ride started out a little rocky, it actually kind of came together at the end. He's definitely a horse that's going to need some consistency. Next came this stunning 13-year-old Self-Francais gelding. As soon as I saw this ad, I could tell this horse was special. Imported from Europe, he had nearly 5 years of training under Tara Coldstar, a well-known name around the eventing circuit. This horse has a history of competing in the upper levels of eventing, so I was thrilled to be going to ride such a seasoned and talented horse. This showstopper led us to the highly esteemed Jorvik stables, where he's been in a training program to keep him in shape for the show season. We got there and I tacked him up. He had such pleasant ground manners. He just kind of quietly stood there, didn't make too much of a fuss. This was super important to me because coming in at a whopping 17 hands, I need this horse to be pleasant on the ground because that's just what I would feel comfortable with when working with such a big horse. He wasn't sour at all when I was tightening his girth, which is what I like to see because that can sometimes indicate there's more going on beneath the surface. This horse was an absolute beast. I think he has to be one of the biggest horses I've ridden. As soon as I got on, I could tell he had a very solid education behind him. He stood so calmly when I mounted, and when we got working, he was one of those horses where it's like he's so sensitive to aids, it's almost hard to ride them, but I feel like working with him and figuring him out would just make me a better, more confident rider. I immediately noticed he was really tuned into what I was doing, his ears were forward the whole time, and then we started cantering. Now, Monty's canter was like a rocking horse, which I personally found a bit difficult to sit at first. It eventually got more comfortable to sit once I relaxed. He had really nice ground covering strides, which would be great during a show jumping around. I did some extending and collecting with him in both trot and canter, and something I really appreciated about him was that he didn't cut any corners. He used all his muscles. He was easy to get on the bit. I feel like he would be great to use during my clinics, and he could really set a strong example. This guy exuded elegance, and I feel like he knows it and absolutely owns it. I also got to have a little jump with him over some cross-country fences. Monty might love cross-country just as much as I do because, I mean, just look at how he absolutely flies over those jumps. Whenever I was having a hard time figuring out my strides, he really had my back and saved me a couple times, which just made me really fall in love with his work ethic, which is something I really value. Not to mention he was super scopy, and I can imagine really climbing levels with him. He's a horse that really just takes care of his rider. Plus, it was a fun challenge figuring out his buttons, and I could definitely see myself continuing that journey with him in the future. Next up in our journey took us down the long road to the quiet, serene town of Mistfall. I love visiting this area, but I was especially excited about today's visit in particular because I was going to be checking out this stunning flea-bitten Lipizzaner mare who has had extensive training in dressage, not so much jumping, but they did mention that they think if her new person were to put in the time, she could excel in the jumping phases of eventing. The cool thing about this mare was that she's actually a rescue project from the South Hoof Rescue down on the peninsula, and her owner was a young girl who brought her up nearly all herself from a neglect situation. When I met her, she seemed quite hesitant. Definitely is one that she's gonna make you work a little bit to gain her trust, but once you do, it's very rewarding. It seemed like she had such a gentle but cautious spirit about her. When we started picking things up, she was getting distracted by who knows what. I mean, I don't blame her, there's so many things to get distracted by in this beautiful place, but it got to a point where it affected our ride. She was picking up her head constantly, especially near this one area of the arena that must have had very scary monsters on the other side, because she would kind of drift away from it. Her leg cues weren't as sharp as I would have liked. I feel like I really had to hold her together to keep her round and supple and going, which created a leg workout for me. Once I got her to really use herself and carry herself really nicely, she had a lovely dressage horse looked her, and it sounds like she has been quite successful in that arena. At one point, we set out some ground pulls just to see how she would go, and she was a bit wary of them at first. She did have some fire-breathing dragon breaths, but with a bit of coaxing, I got her trotting over them. After a little bit, she really got into the groove. She was using her core, picking up her legs. I could tell this mare was a fast learner, which is a quality I really appreciate in a horse. Serafina may not have the prestigious breeding or show record, but her heart and courage speak volumes. A downside to this mare is that she might be more of a project than I'm looking for right now. The point of this new horse is to be able to go out and event. And if I got her, there would be a lot of introduction to jumps training and desensitizing in our future. But I definitely didn't want to push her aside right away because she's got potential to do well in anything she goes into. The next horse up was located at Steve's farm, not too far away from the Silverglade Equestrian Center. This was another warm blood type. What really stood out to me about Maverick was that he had free jumped all the way up to 7 feet, which is an incredible feat. He had a solid foundation and potential goes without saying, so he seemed like a promising prospect. Unfortunately, here is probably where I had my worst or sketchiest trialing experience of the day. It started off with him texting me that he had Maverick tacked up for me even though I asked him not to, so I could get a better sense for his ground manners by tacking him up myself. It felt a little strange that he had just ignored this request, but I still went ahead with the ride because I was curious about this 7-foot jumper. One thing I found interesting, and not really in the good way, is that he looked a great deal different than his pictures. He's definitely had some time off, and I could sort of feel that as when we were walking around, he was sort of sulking, really hollowing out his back, and when I tried to collect him up, he proceeded to pull the reins out of my hands. His owner did preface this with saying that he has had some time off, but it's interesting how they didn't mention that he needs a restart at all in his ad. It was not ideal, but I continued on riding him, and boy, if I thought riding Serafina was a workout, I was in for quite the treat because it was a struggle getting this horse to do any more than a trot. His engine burned out pretty quickly. Eventually, I got to taking him around a small course. We will not be jumping 7 feet today, or ever, most likely, let's be realistic. We only did a few rounds because he was out of breath very quickly, but despite being out of work, he had some serious scope and breezed over those jumps. We had a few chip-ins here and there, but overall, I feel like Maverick just needs a bit of fine-tuning and a workout regime. Although I will say the general sketchy feel I got about the whole trial and interaction was a bit concerning. Our final destination was the picturesque Baroness racetrack run and operated by the Baroness herself. And no, I would not be trying out a racehorse of any kind, but rather quite the opposite. This was Apollo, a Dutch warmblood with training in the upper levels of eventing by the Baroness's head groom, Katie Westfield. One significant thing about this horse is his breeding. He's a quality horse, and his mom and dad are both big names on Jorvik, one being an eventer and the other a top dressage horse. Even though he was out of my budget, I could not pass up the chance to try him out, in case he was really my dream horse. His breeding really showed through in his conformation, and he had such a gorgeous shiny coat. I swear I could see my reflection in it. It took me a moment to get him figured out because boy was this horse fancy. With the help of the trainer on site, I got an incredible extended trot out of him, which was unlike any horse I've ever sat on. It's uncommon to find an eventing horse with such experience and talent in dressage, as eventing dressage is quite different than dressage, but I feel like this horse could just do dressage and really excel. I tried a bit of sit trot on him, and I have never had such a hard time sitting a trot. He was incredibly bouncy, which is probably in part because he is an absolute powerhouse. It was a pretty intimidating ride because he did have quite a strong head. He wasn't as sensitive as some of the other horses I got the chance to ride today. I popped him over a few fences. He did get pretty strong on me. I had a hard time adjusting his collection as he raced on through some of these jumps. So there were quite a few times where I felt like we were just chipping every jump, and it was a bit chaotic. However, when I got him tuned in and focused, that's when he started to really show his potential, and boy does this horse have a lot. It comes down to me just not quite understanding him fully yet. I feel like if I were to really click with this horse, there would be no stopping us, and he would give me a confidence boost and also a challenge. To be quite honest, I'm completely and utterly overwhelmed with my options here. It was nice to be able to ride such a range of horses because I feel like I really was able to narrow down what I'm looking for in a horse. Now I am speaking with owner of the horse I think I'm going to place an offer on. But my decision is still undecided, and I want to take the week to really think over my options. Please give me your opinion on which of the 5 horses I tried today would be the best fit for what I'm looking for, because I think I've narrowed it down to 2 horses. But before I tell you that, I want to hear your thoughts. My brain is going a million miles per minute right now with the excitement and worries, but I know whatever horse I decide on will bring me all sorts of different highs and lows, as is the experience of horses in general. With that being said, stay tuned for the reveal. Be sure to leave your insight below, and I will see you guys next time. Bye everyone!